Most of us can get fruits and vegetables like this so easily we take them for granted. And I could add more to the picture like tomatoes and even chocolate. But actually we're completely reliant on bees for them to be produced and their pollination. So without bees our diet would be much poorer and definitely less rich in vitamins. If people do think about bees, they usually imagine the honeybee, which is shown here. And this bee is really important, not least for the honey it produces, but is actually, on the whole, managed by humans, so it's more of a farm animal. And actually, numbers of honeybees around the world are increasing as more people get into beekeeping. I'm more interested in wild bees, in particular bumblebees, which are shown here. They're larger and fluffier than honeybees, and this means they can actually fly and pollinate for longer during the day and in colder temperatures. And they can also buzz pollinate, which is a very specific type of pollination that honeybees can't do. This bumblebee here is buzz pollinating this flower, and it's doing this by shaking the anthers like a pepper pot to release the pollen. So it's buzzing at a very specific frequency, which then shakes the pollen out. And some plants, like tomatoes, need exactly this type of pollination. We also have lots of different species of bumblebees, just a handful of which are shown here. In Germany, we've got 40 different species, including some really rare alpine ones, and around the world there's more than 250 species. But unfortunately, they've not been doing so well in recent years. Lots of populations have been dramatically declining, and some species are at risk of extinction. And this is because more farmland is looking like this. It's being more and more intensively managed. So there are fewer flowers in the field margins, and also more chemicals are being used, like pesticides. So farmland is becoming more like a desert for bees. And climate change is another problem. And it means that the distributions of some species are moving northwards to get to cooler climates, or in the case of mountain species, moving further up the mountain to get to cooler areas. So my research is looking at these linked pressures of climate and land use change, and how it might develop in the future and affect bumblebee populations in Europe. And to do this, we're using integrated modelling techniques, which can simulate different climatic and socio-economic scenarios into the future and produce maps like this. These show two different potential futures of land use in Europe in 2080. And these, of course, will affect where different bumblebee species are found, as they all have different preferences for land use and temperatures. And we're also taking account of farmer behaviour, because this is really important, as it will affect what land management techniques are ultimately taken up. And to do this, we're using agent-based models of farmer decision-making. And hopefully all these computer modelling techniques will then help us to identify where the most vulnerable bumblebee populations are, and then where conservation and policy interventions need to be used to help to protect them. And computer modelling is great for looking at things like this on a large scale, but it's also really good to experimentally work with bumblebees to find out things in more detail. For example, how exactly is climate change and different temperatures affecting the survival of bees? And I've been doing this over the past few months with laboratory-reared bumblebee queens. Now, queens are really important in bumblebees because they are the only ones to survive over the winter in hibernation. And climate change might be affecting how well they can do this, because the warmer temperatures might mean they're actually less deeply asleep, and so they use up too much of their energy reserves over the winter. And also, different amounts of snow cover can affect their survival. So more snow means they're more insulated, and less snow might mean that they're more exposed to extreme conditions. And I'm lucky enough to work here, which is a perfect place for looking into these things and finding out exactly how they're affecting queen survival. So I hibernated groups of bumblebee queens at 3 different heights up the mountain outside of our institute. And at each height, I had 3 different snow treatments. And one was where extra snow was added, and one where snow was removed to make it more sort of extreme over the winter. And here's a group of bumblebee queens ready for hibernation. Each one is actually sitting inside a hair curler. And it's amazing how sometimes these random things can be really useful in an experiment. They're the perfect size to hold a bumblebee queen. So in that box we had 33 bumblebee queens, and we had 9 of those boxes in total. And each one we buried into the soil at a depth of 10 centimetres, which is an approximation of how deep they hibernate in the wild in the soil. And we also had temperature data loggers next to each box to measure the soil temperature all winter. And then we left our queens to sleep peacefully, and we only visited these sites once a week to shovel snow between the different treatments. And it was a really severe winter, so we dug them up in mid-February as we were concerned about their survival. As they're laboratory-reared bumblebees, they're not actually as tough as the wild ones. But amazingly, 90% of our bumblebees survived the winter, and we had more than 300 to start with. So we brought them back into the lab and put them in an individual box to see which ones would lay eggs and start a colony of their own. And it turns out that this is the tricky part of their life cycle, as not many have managed to do this. So we're still monitoring how our bees are doing at the moment, and it's work in progress. But hopefully we can use all these results to better protect our pollinators in the future. So this is a brief glimpse into my world of bumblebee research, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks very much for your attention.